Okay, good afternoon and welcome to another webinar training series from Jane Irrigation. I'm Richard Rascia, Vice President of Water Management Solutions at Jane, and today we're going to be talking about late season management in nut crops. Now, this is really important because you've got a lot of things happening at the same time that are with nut crops coming into this time of year. And we're fortunate to have Cory with us today to talk about how to use technology to manage all the things that you need to be managing with your nut crops these days. And the thing I really like about Cory is, he's a ton of education behind him. He's a certified crop advisor. He's a certified irrigation designer, and he's a certified ag irrigation specialist. But more important, what I found is that Cory really cares about his customers, and he really cares about ag irrigation. And as a result, last year he was named Agriculturist of the Year by Madera County. And then most recently, we saw an article, I think it was even this week, talking about his work with the Madera Young Farmers and Ranchers and the great work he's doing with them. So, Cory, I kind of wanted to start out today, for somebody who I think has reached celebrity status in our industry, or just about celebrity status for irrigation and agriculture. You've done this in a very humble way, and you've done it in a way that I think has been inspirational to a lot of people. So I just wanted to start out and say, how did you do this? How did this come about? I'm curious about that.
Yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate the kind introduction and kind words. And I think it really boils down to passion at the end of the day. You finding something that you truly love to do. And in agriculture, for me, in a lot of different facets, represents that. It's somewhat of a heritage part in my family, although it's been 3 generations since anybody in my family has really worked or touched the land. But to be a part of a food system that provides food locally but globally as well is really important. And growing up in the valley, you're surrounded by it. So it's very easy to find a way to participate. And from there, what we find is there's always this statistic that gets thrown around. There's 2% of the workforce or 2% of the people are employed in agriculture today. And not very long ago, that number was significantly higher. So even folks like my grandparents who grew up on a farm, they haven't seen fields. They're in the Phoenix metro area now too. They haven't seen fields in a very long time. And so people have kind of lost touch with that. And so as I think my generation continues to be head of household and to continue to make food purchasing decisions, they're very interested in where their food comes from. So taking an opportunity with social media to share those experiences and how food production happens, and then also showing people, the young folks like myself that are involved in the irrigation industry, but also tractor work and chemical sales and crop consulting. There are a lot of young people with a lot of technology, which we'll talk about today, that are making this world, a better place, and kind of part of our slogan, right, which is leave this world better than you found it.
Yeah, so that's interesting, Cory, because I love to ask people, hey, where does your water come from? And they often say, from that faucet or that spigot right there, right? Not very many people know this. And then if you take the next step and ask them where their food comes from, man, this is wild, right? They don't really know, or they have an idea maybe, but it's really big picture. So your video, your photos, all those things are really helping. Just one more question on this. Do you find that you get more engagement from people using your videos, or do they you're one of our contributors to my 7 favorite photos of the week, and those are really interesting. But do you see more engagement on video or photos, and why?
It's definitely going to be video nowadays. I think with the amount of access that everybody has, and I say that loosely in the terms of mobile devices and all the different platforms having quality video sharing capabilities, people are consuming that content, and they actually prefer it. I find more hits on my videos on any of the platforms, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. People are engaged in that, and there has to be a balance, and there has to be a consistency that goes along with that. I think they need to be, maybe it doesn't need to be a movie production, but it definitely needs to be somewhat professionally done. It needs to be clear and concise, but people will listen and view something for a few minutes. And I think what happens is you can really explain the situation. And there are things, even though you've explained it in greater detail than maybe writing a paragraph, people still have some question, some lingering question. And it may not be something you talked about, but in the video, it was something that they saw and it catches their eye, catches their attention. And now they're saying, hey, I want to engage with you. And you didn't say this piece, but what is that? And so that's what I find most valuable in it.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I want to remind everybody that we are having a video contest right now. People are submitting videos of their Jane installations, and the winner is going to win a iPhone 11 Pro, which I think is a $100 phone. So some good incentive there. So anyway, thanks, Cory, for your insight and advice on that. And let's get to late season irrigation management nut crops.
All right. Well, again, thank you everyone for attending. And I think when we discussed the topic of doing this, Richard, I think one of the things that came out of that was something that's really relevant to the time period. And living here in the Central Valley, I live in Fresno, California, and cover most of the Central Valley. Nut crop management and specifically water this time of year is very challenging and very pertinent, as harvest has actually begun in certain parts of our county, even here, and definitely farther south. And will continue on for several more weeks, as there are multiple varieties of just almonds alone, and then we'll get into pistachio harvest as well. But looking at that, this is a topic that I think is really relevant for our producers right here and right now, and kind of wanted to go over some of the reasons why we need to pay attention to that water, and then also the tools that we have in our toolbox to manage that. So just a brief overview for those of you who maybe aren't in California or involved in either of these commodities, but just really focusing on almonds and pistachios. I didn't mean to leave the walnut guys out, but these are two really important crops in my territory, in my area. Work with a lot of growers. And again, congratulations to California almond growers. You guys are gonna have a 3 billion pound crop is the estimate this year. So it's amazing to see what we've been able to do in this industry, and the resources that a number of different commodity organizations have come together to really help build this record crop. And again, that's 3 billion pounds off of 1.25 million acres this year of bearing almond acreage, with more coming online next year as well. And then you go over to the pistachio industry, which is continuing to grow. I attended the American Pistachio Growers Conference this year prior to everything being shut down. And again, we're currently at 250,000 acres of bearing pistachios. They take a little longer to come online, but that's going to expected to continue to climb through 2025 at a minimum. And again, each of these commodities are grown from all the way down in Bakersfield, which is the southern end of the San Joaquin Valley, all the way up well past Sacramento into the North State. And so it's two very important commodities for our ag businesses, and they provide great products that get shipped domestically and all over the world.
Hey, Cory, that's a lot of almonds, and I know I've been drinking a lot of almond milk lately, so I'm trying to contribute, but how's the price these days?
Yeah, it's definitely in limbo right now, and the reason is you have a record crop coming in, and then we have disruption, right? We have a situation globally that everybody is aware of, and some of these challenges that are coming on with just moving product. It's not even if countries are accepting it. It's, is there a boat to put it on? Are there containers that can be filled? And that's going to be a challenge for marketing that product, let alone lost income for people who aren't working or can't go out and access these products.
Wow. Yeah, there was already enough unmanageable influences into the ag business, and yeah, you add COVID and what's happening on top of that. It's tough for these guys.
Yeah, absolutely. But our growers are some of the best in the world, and they'll find a way to manage through it and do the things that need to be done. And again, I'm optimistic on the outlook of both these industries long term. So kind of going into why we're here, though, and really the kind of the nuts and bolts of it. and this is a little more specific to the almond industry. I'll be bouncing back and forth between the two a little bit during this presentation, but why is proper irrigation or available water important during this time? And two of the physiological processes that happen are going to be bud differentiation, which will be a little bit later than we currently are right now, but that's where the tree is going to make a decision. And that decision is going to be, am I going to create buds that are going to turn into flowers later on that can be, as everybody knows, our bee industry, right? And we bring in bees to pollinate these trees. Or am I going to be a bud that's going to create vegetative growth, which unfortunately, especially in the short term, vegetative growth doesn't necessarily produce you crop. So if you have something that goes into flower, you're more likely to get an almond out of that. And with that, getting in more specifically into the August timeframe, the production of pollen begins. And so you can imagine those two things being shorted in any way, shape, or form will significantly be reduced. And that's going to affect next year's crop right here, right now. And you haven't even taken this year's crop all the way off yet. And you certainly probably haven't even been paid for it. And you're already setting the stage for next year. And so again, these things are done through the movement of carbohydrates and development of carbohydrates in the tree. And again, water helps facilitate nutrients in the tree. And so again, that's why we're going to talk about what we're going to talk about today. So again, how well we've irrigated prior to harvest will greatly affect water management during this period. If you are way behind going into this, it's going to be very tough to have a good outcome. So really focusing on the season early on and all the way through is what's going to set the stage for this really important time frame of not just getting the crop off and delivered, but like I said, getting it developed for the following season. The picture that I placed in here is actually in a pistachio field that I was helping a grower with, and we have our Jane Logic monitoring technology out there. And beginning of the season, trees aren't even really fully awake yet. But what we did is we set up, we went through and we ran our irrigation sets. We tested our telemetry equipment. We cleaned lines. We made sure everything was good to go well in advance of those trees needing water, so that when we went into irrigation season, we were ready to go and there weren't going to be any surprises going into it. And so again, the performance and design of your irrigation system, which you can manage as a grower and as somebody who's having a system installed for you, can undo the success of what you've built throughout the season, because maybe you can't apply the water that you need to apply or the nutrients. And again, we'll show some of that later on. So you're setting everything up for later on.
So Cory, if I have soil moisture sensing and I'm coming into a hull split, I can actually see the amount of water being reduced, and I can actively manage because I have data. What's somebody who doesn't have that doing? Are they just guessing or experienced? What are they doing?
Few different ways. There's a pressure bomb testing where people are testing leaves out in the field, and it's very precise and it's very accurate. The issue becomes is the labor in order to do that, the equipment, the experience, and in getting that process right, sampling enough of your orchard, because again, it's one leaf on one tree at one time. Again, it's a great method, but if you're managing thousands and thousands of acres, it can be costly and it can be a little bit cumbersome. And then there are other folks that I know very well that it's like licking your finger and sticking it in the wind and trying to tell you what the wind speed is. Yeah. It's basically just kind of feel and experience, which will always play a part in farming. But if you have the tools readily available to manage that, and we'll show that in a few more slides, why wouldn't you take advantage of that?
Right. And yeah, and not just in farming. Hey, in my life.
Yeah, absolutely. And but here in this slide in particular, I pulled these from two publicly available sources, one the Almond Board and then another one from Pistachio Research Board for some work that was done a while ago. But the left side is showing almond water use in different zones of the state. Zone 12 really refers to fairly close to where I am, Fresno, Madera County. And then zone 14 is farther north and west. But again, the graph on, or chart on the right, excuse me, shows kind of pistachios. And again, they can both be very water intensive, but I have these circles put in here to really highlight this time frame that we're in right now and kind of what we're coming up to, and how much water you historically need to apply to these plants in order to just maintain what the current status is. If there's a dollar in the checking account and you're going to spend 100, then you have to find a way to make 100 just to get back to having $1. So that's going to be important for what I'm about to talk about right now. So you talked about Jane Logic and some of those sensor opportunities. So as we looked at that chart before, we have historical ETC rates. And again, June, July, August are very water intensive use months for these commodities. And specifically in almonds, to influence whole split, in some cases, you actually have to reduce irrigation events by up to 50% in a single week. And that's usually a process that takes about 2 weeks to happen. And the goal is, again, to get these nuts to split open and expose the kernel, and then get in there as quickly as possible and start applying your crop protection chemicals to make sure you don't get navel orangeworm, things like that. And so looking at the chart on the top left from our Jane Logic software, this is a customer that uses it, you can actually see the event. There were some irrigation events. You see the rise in that root zone irrigation sum, and then you can see that step down effect, those kind of small zigzags as it draws down. And then you can see there wasn't an irrigation event until, say roughly the 18th or 19th. And again, that's a time period where they were trying to force those trees. They're going out and visually looking at it and then saying, you know what, I need to increase this or decrease that. And in the meantime, you can actually watch the soil profile change from a water volumetric standpoint. And again, the graph below that is part of our widget for infiltration. Again, you're showing no water entering the root zone and penetrating the ground. So this is a period where you're really forcing the crop to dry down in a way. And so any of that built up soil moisture reserve may now be depleted depending on your soil type and how much reserve you had. And now harvest is only 5 weeks away. So you have a lot of work to do in a short period of time to get those reserves built back up. And again, with lighter soils, that can be a challenge. And so I know there's a lot of words on this slide, but again, I think this really just kind of hammers it out in a mathematical way. 8 inches of water required in July, August being very similar for almonds. I see a lot of irrigation systems with really low application rates because the irrigation designer did not really explain this to the end user or the purchaser, and really what their water limitations might be. And so if you're using a 0.021 inch per hour application rate to basically meet that, roughly 16-inch demand to keep your profile back to even again, you'd have to run 762 hours in 60 days. So pretty significant amount of runtime. Couple that with uniformity challenges. So if you have poor uniformity, you have to irrigate even more to overcome that. And then consider what the energy cost of that might be, or your pumping costs if you have a system that isn't efficient on pressure use or pressure loss. So you start targeting this whole split, you have low application rates, could have high energy costs. 2 months could be very, very challenging for you.
Yeah, and looking at this, Cory, challenging and expensive if you don't have it right. Just calculating those numbers up in my head, and I'm thinking 10 or 15% reduction in pumping costs, energy, water. I could be saving a ton of money.
Absolutely, and as we discussed earlier, we have a bit of price uncertainty in certain markets. So one of the things you can control is your input costs. And so this is one way to do it and really focus on the water. So again, using more of our Jane Logic software and kind of imaging, I pulled this out from, again, another grower that uses our product. And so using soil moisture probes in Jane Logic helps us track moisture status, depth, and available water for trees. And so I put 3 circles in here, and I'm going to use my pointer here for a second. Down here at the 48-inch sensor, I put a yellow circle, just try to break them up. But in this yellow circle, you can see this built up deep moisture that's happened. And then again, you have your sum at the top and then your different levels. but you can see we have some deep moisture that's built up. And then you can see here the lack of irrigation events. Well, I can tell you that August in Kern County is pretty warm. And so those trees are using water, they're getting into harvest time. And so they can't run water during that time, can't get the nuts wet, they got to get equipment in there, got to, you know, keep things moving. And so again, now what you start to see is you start to see this overall dry down of that root zone area. And then you see an irrigation event and they start bringing it back up again and they get water down to 24 inches, but we didn't even get it to 36 because the trees were using so much water during that time, put on what they could before maybe their next shake, took a break, kind of managed through this area the best they could. And then you see a long irrigation event here in the blue circle. And again, that's to rebuild that profile at the end of the season. To, again, as we talked about getting into September and some of the development processes that happen. So you can see that very visually with, you know, a few clicks of a button with our Jane Logic software and really have a good idea of where your field stands.
Yeah, it's visually, it makes it very simple, right? And I want to break down into the specifics. I can get there too, but yeah, I love this visual quick look to see exactly where I am with water in my fields.
Absolutely. So going from there, taking Jane Logic a step further, Jane is partnered with a company called AgroLogix, which I think most of us are familiar with at this point. And again, they've combined together, and now we can offer irrigation system and soil moisture monitoring control with analytical data-driven imagery. And that's really important because I think that is part of the future of this business is imagery. And so this partnership allows Jane to offer irrigation materials, system monitoring, system automation, crop water use analytics, and field-specific recommendations, along with all these folks that we have on staff with a number of different certifications to really help you drive those analytics into action. It's a lot of companies promise you all of this data, but we have people that know what to do with that data to make quality recommendations. And I think that's what sets us apart.
I do too, Cory. And when I think about it too, I think if I really want to take control of my irrigation, I've got Jane Logic, so I can see the soil moisture. I've got control, so if I want to start and stop valves, I can. And then finally, I can see pretty quickly, you know, immediate responses or issues that I'm having using Logics. I don't know where a whole package of information exists other than with Jane that would give me all that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, you know, why I'm proud to be able to help growers with all these different tools and always feel like there's something to offer and make that operation, make that irrigation system better. So it's been a great partnership and a great tool. And so this is one of the tools that comes along with AgroLogix and Jane Logic together is ETC mapping. And so by ETC mapping, I mean evapotranspiration of the crop. And so with the satellite imaging, we are able to go ahead and pull images on a weekly basis, look at a field, doesn't matter where it is, it doesn't matter what commodity it is, and be able to get, as the image shows on the left, and really an image that can be deciphered pretty quickly just based on color. It's a red to blue scale, blue, you know, transpiring at a very high rate, white being in the middle of the gradient, and then red not transpiring, but also giving you that analytical information of what was the average water use, what are in different percentiles, and again, what's the uniformity of that. And so soil moisture probes can help us correctly schedule in your irrigation event length by ensuring we don't over apply water through the root zone. But I still have to understand what the total requirement is. And instead of using some of those historical charts that we saw on a zone based on maybe in Madera, maybe in Fresno, we can pinpoint to a field specific location on how much water that crop is using. So again, using the field requirements coupled with ETC imaging allows you to maximize your irrigation efficiency by putting on the correct amount of water for the correct amount of time.
That's great. Finally, a fuel gauge for, right? Fuel gauge like in my truck. I finally know how much fuel I have or water I have in the field with a very quick and easy look every morning.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so from there, kind of diving in a little bit more on ETC mapping, we talked about that scheduling part. So we have a screenshot here from our Jane Logic system for two different fields right next to each other, same commodity, but it's interesting to see the forecasted hours towards the left side of that chart. And they're both almonds, they're both producing, they are fields adjacent to each other, but based on the images and based on the weather and all of these things that the satellite can pick up, plus what we know from an irrigation standpoint, they have very different schedules. And so if you just were looking at one of them, you could be if you irrigated them the same, you'd be under irrigating one or over irrigating one. With this technology, I can very easily see how much water to put in each field. And maybe that saves me labor. Maybe that saves me that pumping cost. Maybe it saves me yield because I didn't put too little water on one of the blocks. And again, that is the power of this imaging.
Yeah.
So moving into KC curves, again, this is an agrologics report that comes out of it. There are a lot of changes and discussion around KC curves right now. UC Extension, all the government agencies, different commodity groups have done a fantastic job over the years, helping us understand water use of different plants, especially at different times. But using imaging, we are able to take it a step further and write essentially field-specific prescriptions for crops in a way that I don't think we ever thought we would. I know something that I didn't think we would be doing just 5 years ago. And so from there, we're kind of developing our own KC curve, if you will, because this particular ranch here is a grower that I work very closely with. It's like 540 acres contiguously. And you can see here, ETC is very different between these fields. And I say very different because you're talking about applying a lot of water over a big area. And so 0.45 to 0.42 may not seem like a lot, but when you start adding that up over a season, over that number of acres, that could be a lot of hours in irrigation events. And so these fields right next to each other, all planted at the same time, all irrigated with the same irrigation system, are using different amounts of water. And it's due to a number of different things. So moving from there, another product that we get with our agrologics offering is NDVI imaging. And so this is a visual and numerical representation of crop vigor. So as you can see on the left, that's the visual one because it's a lot more fun than charts. And from there, that spectral look at really a tree's status, if you will, may or may not be related to irrigation. But I can tell you that a lot of the times during the summer, it tends to be. And so if your ETC maps are uniform and blue, but your NDVI imaging is showing some regression or change, could be other factors such as disease, pest, or environmental, depending on if you're next to a highway or something like that. I've seen fields that react differently because, believe it or not, trucks passing by on the highway, kick up dust and change, different environmental impacts on those fields, but we can see it very quickly and make a management decision quickly as well.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head here, Cory, when you said it's a lot easier to look at these visually and grasp what's going on versus when you're looking at a chart and you're having to decipher that in your head or maybe add some things up on an Excel spreadsheet. So yeah, thank you for showing that.
Absolutely. And so again, NDVI can really help us this time of year, especially kind of trying to avoid a topic called defoliation. Early on, there was a note in one of the slides that talked about leaf drop, and we want to avoid leaf drop, and I'll explain why in a minute, and the cost may be associated around that. But here you can see post-harvest, this scoring, if you will, of the vigor is very low because we have red instead of those greens and even yellows maybe that we saw before. And so this, you're going to lose some leaves during harvest. It's just going to happen because it is so hot. You are shaking a tree. But again, avoiding this and really understanding the cost of that is something that imaging can do for you. And really throughout the entire year, but this time of year, really avoiding these dark red areas. So defoliation impact, again, you can see a field on the top left where there are definitely some very big changes in that field. And believe it or not, that is a drip irrigated field. And it's amazing to see that. It's an older almond field. It's probably, I'd say maybe 15 years old, but there's obviously some regression in the irrigation system itself. But again, keeping a longer leaf life can allow the nutrients that are stored in those leaves to be pulled back in, but also keeps the tree active in and of itself. in really pulling any nutrients that you do need to put on. 15%, somewhere around that range, is the industry discussion on how much N your almond crop would require. And so that's in August and September. And in order to keep transpiration and keep things moving, it's really valuable to have leaves on the plant. And so losing them during harvest is something we don't want to do. And again, we talk about having, nitrogen that's stored in the leaf structure and could potentially be used for some of these other reproductive processes. Just at a very base level, if you used UN32, which is a very common type of fertilizer, and you budgeted your entire 275 pounds maybe applied per acre on that, it comes out to about $88 an acre. Even just take 1% loss of that in leaf defoliation, and 1% of your N is 88 cents an acre. And that may not seem like a lot, but a lot of growers use Can 17 to spoon feed, so your costs are higher. But then you have other nutrients that we're not even accounting for in this. And so 88 cents doesn't seem like a lot, but you get nickeled and dimed, and eventually you go, wow, I left a lot of fertilizer. You paid for that fertilizer, and you paid for the labor to apply it into those plants. Don't let it fall off.
Right.
And to do that.
Right, yeah. No, you say 88 cents an acre, I think of $1 right away, and I think of 10,000 acres or more, and I go, wow, it's really a lot of money.
Absolutely. So, and then another topic that's always important this time of year, specifically right after harvest, but is thinking about salinity management. We want to manage it all year, and almonds are certainly more sensitive to salinity issues, than pistachios are. But one of the neat things with our GeneLogic soil moisture probe technology is it allows you to track EC and monitor your progress late season when you're trying to flush those salts out. And so at the bottom, you can see this is like a 3 or 4 month span, and we can see at the different levels, 12 inches, 24, 36, et cetera. And I made a circle here on this side to show what we were able to do late season to try and push that salinity in the soil down, which again, there are a number of different tactics that growers can employ. It depends on where they are. But again, keeping track of what that number is really helpful. And then going in kind of here for some more stuff on salinity, this is from Pistachio Research Board. And so on the left-hand side, there are some studies going on talking about soil EC and water EC, and then how that affects evapotranspiration. And again, decreased water use sounds like a good thing, but not when you're trying to pull nutrients into a plant. And so again, failure to lower soil salinity can reduce vigor long-term, can be very toxic. And then again, people say, oh, well, pistachios are more salt tolerant than almonds, and they are, but yield can still be impacted. And a number that I pulled from the study that I read was there can be up to a 3% yield decline per decisemen in pistachios, depending on the rootstock type. And you think about that, 3%, that could be a lot of money left on the table just by not managing salts at the end of the year.
Yeah. So Cory, really people should be going to irrigate once, twice, a couple times, even after harvest. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be site specific, and it's going to be crop specific, and what your water availability is and what your water quality is. But I know last year in Fresno area, we were fortunate enough to have enough surface water that came in that a lot of growers were able to irrigate almonds even through the end of October. And so they were able to run long, heavy irrigation sets and force a lot of that material that had built up in the root zone down and out, and really start with a fresh profile next season. And hopefully we get rains as well, but in California, it's kind of, especially here in the valley, it's hard to count on that. So one of the things you can do is set yourself up with soil amendments, and then obviously good irrigation practices. Yeah.
Right. Another variable we have trouble managing, right? That's rain.
Absolutely. So this is a summary slide. So if you came late or thought we could have just skipped everything we did before, we could just go over this slide. And nonetheless, really focusing on what we went over. Do not deplete soil moisture profile between whole split and harvest. We have to try and build that up. A good irrigation design will not require excessive runtime. a .021 application rate probably doesn't do anybody any favors. If they're in a a loose soil or tight water condition. And from there, again, soil moisture probe data can help us verify that profile status at the critical stages of management, which is now and really for the next month. And then couple that with ETC and NDVI imagery, you can identify tree health, water use, and then drive meaningful management issues and decisions right away. And then salinity must be considered all season, but especially postseason, as that's really the time that we can impact it, because we're not putting fertilizers in. We're not worried about fertilizer moving out of the root zone as much. And so if we've applied all that right, now is the time to address salinity after you finish harvesting.
So Cory, I was excited before this presentation. After getting it, I'm really excited. But do I have enough time to do anything, or am I looking at next season, or can I get started some type of technology today?
We could have you started on technology right now, and you'd have reports within 5 days. There is opportunity. It's a great question. Probably not the right time to go install soil moisture probes, but with the imaging and the different technology offerings that we have, again, you can have water use and crop vigor reports and uniformity scores almost instantly. And again, we'd be happy to discuss that with you. I know I'm pretty easy to find on the internet, as you had mentioned earlier. But if you have a different Jane rep or a different person at Jane that reach out to us. We'd love to talk to you. We don't, and I know today with social distancing and all these things, we actually don't even have to visit your field. We just have to know where it is, and we can actually remotely do that work for you. But if you do want to meet, we're more than happy to do so in a safe manner. And again, I wanted to say thanks to everybody for attending. Please have a safe harvest. There's a lot of activity going on this time of year. And then also there's some resources here. Obviously, janeusa.com is where you're going to find all of our products and information, contacts as well. But the Almond Board of California does a great job on water use and different efficiency programs. And then the Pistachio Research Board as well has a ton of things for growers.
Yeah. Well, Cory, thank you. And I really want to encourage people to reach out and ask you for help. I know they won't be disappointed. I've known Cory for a long time, and I know his commitment to his customers and his the way he doesn't cut corners in anything. He really does things right, and his customers benefit from that. So reach out if you want that help. And it's great to know that we can get busy with this right away. I don't have to wait till next year. So thanks for that information, Cory. And thank everybody for joining us today. And another reminder that we still have our video contest going. And we'll look forward to seeing everybody next week. We've got a couple presentations on Wednesday and Friday next week. And remember, we've got about 30 hours of content now in website. Just search for the Irrigation Training Series, and you can see it all there. Thanks again, everybody, and have a great weekend. Thanks, Cory.
Thank you, guys.